I began noticing a distinct pattern in my emergency department, and once it became clear, I could no longer ignore it. Every single week, I met another patient, someone just like you, who had spent decades eating foods widely considered normal, only to find themselves sitting terrified while waiting for life-altering test results. I started researching why this was happening, and what I discovered is the sole reason I am speaking with you today. The evidence linking daily dietary choices to cancer risk has become so overwhelming and impossible to dismiss that I believe most individuals have no idea how serious the situation has become. Right now, as you listen to this, the food choices you made over the past week are quietly influencing the biological odds inside your body over the coming years and decades. These foods gradually tilt the metabolic scales against you one meal at a time, but the critical takeaway is that this process remains largely preventable. Furthermore, much of the cellular damage is reversible if you understand the underlying mechanics, so let me explain how. I want to be entirely clear from the start because this topic is vital. My goal is not to create panic about your evening dinner. Having spent more than 20 years practicing emergency medicine, I have held the hands of countless individuals who did everything they believed was right. When I share this information, I am not placing blame on consumers. I am pulling back the curtain on dietary realities that commercial food manufacturers prefer you never examine closely. The strength of current scientific evidence linking specific dietary habits to certain malignancies is comparable to, and in some respects clearer than, the early observational research that originally linked smoking to lung disease. Do you recall how that public health story unfolded decades ago? For many years, the tobacco industry publicly claimed the scientific consensus was unresolved, funded their own counter-studies, and muddied the public discourse until the truth could no longer be contained. It took nearly 7 decades from the first robust evidence against tobacco before regulatory bodies took decisive systemic action. Yet the ultimate reward for that persistence was undeniable. Lung disease rates dropped significantly, millions of lives were saved, and I truly believe we will eventually view modern processed foods through that exact same lens. Before moving further, I must maintain complete transparency with you because it sets the appropriate context for the rest of our discussion. Everything I am sharing stems from years of observing these metabolic patterns play out in real time among people facing the most challenging moments of their lives. This information is intended strictly for educational purposes rather than individual medical advice, and you should always consult your personal physician before making changes to your medications or healthcare treatment plan. However, the foundational knowledge regarding how these foods interact with human physiology belongs to you, and no institution should withhold it. If this framework resonates with you and you wish to learn more about protecting your long-term health, stay with me until the end because the final food group on our list encompasses all the others and represents the most critical takeaway of this discussion. How can we be confident in these scientific conclusions? Let us begin with the specific food category supported by the strongest and most direct clinical evidence available. Here is the vital point to remember. These risks are preventable and manageable, so let me demonstrate how. The first food category to address is processed meat. This includes pepperoni on pizza, deli sandwich meats, cured ham, morning bacon, sausages, hot dogs, and any meat product that has been salted, cured, smoked, or chemically treated to extend shelf life and enhance flavor. I need you to understand a classification that sounds alarming at first glance, but please hear out the full explanation. The World Health Organization classifies processed meat as a Group 1 human carcinogen regarding colorectal health. A Group 1 designation is reserved exclusively for agents where researchers possess the highest level of scientific certainty that they can cause cellular mutations in humans. This is the same scientific certainty framework applied to substances like tobacco smoke and industrial asbestos. However, there is no need to panic, as this label does not mean a bacon sandwich carries the same level of absolute risk as smoking cigarettes. The Group 1 classification reflects how confident scientists are in the causal link, not the sheer magnitude of the risk itself. To put it simply, the medical consensus is extremely confident that consuming processed meats on a regular basis elevates the baseline risk of colorectal issues. For any single individual, the relative risk increase is modest, but it accumulates meaningfully across a lifetime of exposure. Why exactly does this happen inside the body? Let us examine the biological process taking place within your digestive tract, because understanding it will change how you view processed meats forever. Consider the delicate mucosal lining of your gut as smooth, pristine wallpaper lining a hallway, constantly maintaining and renewing itself. Processed meats are preserved using additive compounds called nitrites, which maintain that reddish-pink color and delay spoilage. Inside the warm, acidic environment of the stomach and intestines, those nitrites can combine with protein breakdown products to form compounds called nitrosamines. These nitrosamines act like microscopic irritants that directly disrupt the cellular DNA within your intestinal lining. I want you to internalize this core biological concept. Almost every form of malignant cell growth originates from sustained damage to cellular DNA. This cellular process operates on the exact same principle as a severe sunburn. When skin is exposed to intense ultraviolet radiation, that energy damages the DNA within skin cells, which can surface years later as cellular abnormalities. In every instance, abnormal cell growth begins the moment genetic material is damaged and uncorrected. The compromised cell begins replicating, passing that structural error along to new cells until a tissue mass eventually forms. It is the exact same fundamental mechanism occurring in a different organ system. However, nitrites represent only one part of the equation, as a second mechanism involves a specific form of iron called heme iron. Heme iron is the compound that gives red and processed meats their dark, rich color. Within the digestive tract, heme iron can stimulate the formation of those same damaging chemical compounds while continuously irritating the intestinal wall. A third mechanism involves cooking these meats at high temperatures, which creates an additional family of harmful chemical byproducts. Those heat-generated compounds deserve their own detailed discussion, which brings us directly to our second food category. While these biological details sound concerning, understanding them is your single best tool for personal prevention. The second category consists of foods that have been heavily charred, blackened, or severely scorched during cooking. Consider the most common culprits: barbecue meats with thick black crusts, heavily burned toast, or steaks seared over extreme heat until the exterior turns black. The sunburn analogy applies here just as accurately, because the core issue remains sustained tissue and DNA damage. In this instance, the cellular stress arrives via thermal heat and combustion smoke rather than ultraviolet light. The primary concern stems from two distinct groups of chemical compounds that form when high-protein foods are exposed to open flames or extreme heat. The first group consists of heterocyclic amines, which develop when amino acids and creatine react under high surface temperatures. The second group includes polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons, which form when rendering fat drips directly onto hot coals or burner plates, rising back up in smoke to coat the food. Both chemical groups have been shown in laboratory models to induce the kind of DNA strand breaks that can eventually lead to cellular mutation. This entire topic ultimately comes down to a single practical concept: understanding and managing relative risk. Maintaining long-term wellness is about recognizing what carries cumulative risk and making informed choices about your personal comfort level. To be clear, enjoying an occasional summer cookout with family is not something to fear. I recently hosted an outdoor family gathering where my grandchildren played in the yard and we enjoyed a wonderful afternoon together. I am fully aware that meal carried a tiny, negligible fraction of risk, but enjoying a few properly cooked family barbecues a year is completely different from eating charred, smoke-covered meats daily. It functions identically to having an occasional glass of wine with dinner. A single glass will not meaningfully alter your health trajectory. Conversely, a single healthy meal or one afternoon walk does not instantly make you fit. It is the habits you practice consistently week after week and year after year that ultimately shape your physical health. Enjoy your family cookouts, but avoid making heavily charred or scorched foods an everyday habit. Let me share a brief story about a former patient, because clinical statistics only tell part of the story while real human experiences stay with us. Several years ago, a 73-year-old retired waitress named Sharon came into my clinic, sharp-minded and full of warmth. For years, she had experienced mild nerve tingling and persistent fatigue, assuming they were merely standard signs of getting older. Like many people of her generation, Sharon ate what she had always been taught was normal fare: bacon and toast for breakfast, deli sandwiches for lunch, and hot dogs at baseball games. Nobody had ever informed her that these daily choices carried long-term metabolic consequences. When her formal diagnosis was confirmed, she looked at me with tears in her eyes and asked why no one had ever explained this to her sooner. I did not have a satisfying answer because while the clinical research existed, it had never been translated into practical advice for everyday kitchens. That specific conversation is one of the main reasons I advocate for public health education today, so you never have to ask that same painful question. This brings us to our third category, which involves a widespread misconception that needs to be clarified immediately. You have likely heard the popular phrase that sugar directly feeds abnormal cells, but the actual biological reality is much more nuanced and useful. The primary risk associated with sugar-sweetened beverages is not a direct line from liquid sugar to a growing mass, but rather an indirect path mediated by metabolic hormones. The specific beverages to monitor closely include standard sodas, heavily sweetened coffee drinks, commercial energy drinks, and even processed fruit juices marketed as healthy options. Consider the cascade of metabolic events that occurs when you consume these liquids. Because liquid sugars lack dietary fiber and complex structure, they enter your bloodstream almost instantly, causing a rapid spike in blood glucose. To handle this sudden influx of glucose, your pancreas releases a large surge of the regulatory hormone insulin. Think of insulin as a key whose job is to unlock cellular doors so glucose can enter and be used for metabolic energy. Experiencing this occasionally creates no long-term harm, but triggering this surge multiple times a day for decades leads to two distinct problems. First, your cells become progressively less responsive to insulin over time. The cellular locks grow resistant, forcing your pancreas to produce even higher levels of the hormone. We define this clinical state as insulin resistance. Second, persistently high insulin levels signal the body to store excess energy as fat, particularly deep visceral fat around internal organs. This metabolic shift is critical because chronically elevated insulin, alongside growth factors like IGF-1, acts on cellular pathways like a foot pressed firmly on the accelerator. These signals instruct cells to divide and grow rapidly, a process that is healthy in controlled amounts but problematic when sustained continuously for years. Over time, this hyperstimulated environment allows altered cells to multiply rather than being naturally cleared away by immune surveillance. Furthermore, deep abdominal fat is not passive tissue. It actively secretes inflammatory signals into circulation day after day. Chronic low-grade inflammation, a persistent internal stress, is itself a major driver of cellular dysfunction. Thus, refined sugar does not simply feed target cells, it creates the precise hormonal and inflammatory environment in which cellular growth thrives. Our fourth category covers deep-fried fast foods, an area frequently surrounded by online misinformation. You may have heard claims that seed oils are inherently toxic, but the scientific evidence that raw oils themselves are directly harmful is quite weak. The primary issue is not the fresh bottle of oil sitting in your pantry, but what occurs when commercial kitchens heat and reuse that oil continuously. When frying oils are held at extreme temperatures and reused repeatedly throughout the day, they undergo severe chemical breakdown called oxidation. This oxidation process generates harmful secondary byproducts, including aldehyde compounds that can damage cellular structures and DNA. Compare a single tablespoon of fresh oil used once in a home pan with hundreds of gallons of commercial oil reheated for hours on end. By the end of a busy commercial shift, that heavily used oil has chemically transformed into a completely different substance. The issues with fast food extend beyond degraded oils due to the overall nutritional profile of these meals. Fast food pairs oxidize fats with refined carbohydrates like white flour breading, delivering dense calories in easily overconsumed portions. This combination strongly promotes weight gain, and clinical data establishes excess body weight as a major independent risk factor for numerous health conditions. Excess body fat exerts its negative effects through the exact same insulin resistance and inflammatory pathways we just reviewed. Consequently, a single fast food meal delivers oxidized compounds, excessive calories, and inflammatory triggers all at once. At this point, many people feel overwhelmed and assume it is too late to make meaningful changes. Making that assumption is a major mistake because your body possesses a remarkable ability to recover when given the right conditions. Stay focused on these principles because our final section unifies all these concepts into a simple, actionable approach. This brings us to the fifth category, which serves as the overarching umbrella for everything we have discussed: ultra-processed foods. These items are industrially manufactured using ingredients rarely found in a home kitchen, such as synthetic emulsifiers, artificial flavorings, and chemical additives designed to maximize shelf life and taste. If you reflect on the previous categories, processed meats, sugary drinks, and deep-fried items, nearly all of them fall under this single umbrella. Understanding ultra-processed food provides a unified framework for evaluating your daily diet as a whole. Extensive research from leading academic institutions worldwide consistently links high consumption of ultra-processed foods to adverse health outcomes. The underlying biological mechanisms will sound familiar: rapid blood sugar spikes, chronically high insulin, systemic inflammation, and disruption of the gut microbiome. Consider your gut microbiome as a diverse garden where beneficial bacteria support overall immune function and intestinal health. Heavy intake of ultra-processed foods allows opportunistic bacterial strains to flourish, disrupting that delicate ecosystem. This triple impact, metabolic strain, systemic inflammation, and microbiome disruption stems directly from a diet heavy in hyper-processed products. We must be honest about why these products dominate modern food systems. They are engineered for profitability and long shelf life, rather than biological nourishment. These foods are specifically formulated to bypass natural fullness signals, encouraging continuous consumption and repeated purchases. Clinical studies consistently demonstrate that individuals consuming ultra-processed diets naturally consume hundreds of extra calories daily compared to those eating whole foods. Because food manufacturing is a massive global industry, large-scale regulatory shifts take decades to implement. Realistically, the responsibility and the power to make immediate changes rests entirely with you in your daily environment. You do not have to wait for commercial systems to change when you can choose to modify your personal food environment today. Let us establish a straightforward, sustainable action plan that you can implement step by step. First, reduce your reliance on processed meats by replacing daily deli items with whole foods like eggs, oats, or fresh fish. Second, minimize surface charring when cooking meats by using moderate heat and trimming blackened sections before eating. Third, replace sugar-sweetened beverages with plain water, sparkling water, or unsweetened tea to help stabilize baseline insulin levels. Fourth, enjoy deep-fried fast foods as an occasional convenience rather than a daily habit. Fifth, prioritize whole, minimally processed foods that resemble their original natural state. If an item grew from the ground, came from a tree, or originated from nature, it aligns far better with long-term metabolic health. The common thread across every topic we covered today involves cellular stress, elevated insulin, and ongoing inflammation. The single most effective decision you can make is to minimize ultra-processed products and build your meals around real, whole foods. That single dietary shift naturally resolves the vast majority of the specific metabolic risks we have discussed. As you gain a clearer understanding of how these foods interact with your body, choosing whole foods becomes an intuitive process. Focus on expanding your nutritional knowledge, experimenting with home cooking, and making steady progress week by week. Share these practical insights with someone in your life who could benefit from them. Take one positive step today and take full ownership of your personal health journey.